Right now, as you're watching this, a building in China is cracking. Somewhere a bridge is buckling under weight it was never designed to hold. A school gymnasium is sagging from rain it should have easily survived. An artificial island is sinking back into the sea it was built to conquer. The Chinese government spent decades convincing the world it could build faster, bigger, and better than anyone. Turns out, they were right about faster. But faster meant cheaper. Cheaper meant corrupt, and corrupt meant deadly. It's called TOFU-DRAG engineering, the Chinese phrase for construction so shoddy, so rushed, so hollowed out by corruption that it looks solid from a drone, but crumbles the second reality kicks in. In 2024 alone, over 100 people died in bridge and highway collapses across China. In November 2025, a brand new bridge lasted less than a year before falling into a river. And this isn't just about buildings. This is about an economy built on speculation, a military built on sand, and a government that can censor videos, but can't censor gravity. Because in the end, you can't arrest erosion. You can't jail a cracked foundation. And China is literally falling apart. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the promise. For decades, China sold the world a vision. Skylines rising overnight, high-speed rail stretching across deserts, entire cities sprouting from farmland in months. Western observers marveled. Economists called it the greatest construction boom in human history. And they weren't wrong. China completed projects in weeks that would take other nations years. Skyscrapers were assembled at record speed. Expansive bridges and tunnels appeared seemingly overnight. The world watched in awe as China seemed to defy the laws of physics and economics alike. But here's what they didn't mention. The Communist Party system for promoting officials relies heavily on hitting economic targets and showing off big projects. A local party secretary might earn promotions and accolades by rapidly developing his city, erecting massive housing complexes or landmark bridges during his tenure. This created a powerful incentive to prioritize speed over quality. Construction companies, often in collusion with officials, were under constant pressure to build fast and cheap. And corruption at every level meant safety regulations could be ignored for the right price. If a contractor can skim money off by using inferior concrete or thinner steel bars, and there's no independent inspector willing to call them out, many will do exactly that to pad their profits. The result? A national epidemic of what the Chinese call TOFU-DRAG projects. The term was famously coined by former Premier Zhu Rongji in 1998 when he inspected a collapsed flood dike on the Yangtze River and angrily compared it to a sloppy pile of bean curd dregs. The crumbly residue left over after making tofu. The phrase stuck. Now, every time a bridge falls apart or a building collapses suspiciously soon after being built, Chinese citizens mutter the same phrase, TOFU-DRAG. The world marveled at China's skyline. Now it's holding its breath. But the cracks weren't just symbolic, they were literal, and the disaster started from the sea. In the South China Sea, China took a bold gamble to project power. It built massive artificial islands atop reefs and rocks, equipped with runways long enough for heavy bombers, missile shelters, radar arrays, and military installations. These outposts were intended as unsinkable aircraft carriers, extending Chinese power into contested waters. The stakes couldn't be higher. The South China Sea contains rich fishing grounds, potential oil and gas reserves, and sees about 22% of global trade. Roughly $5 trillion worth pass through its shipping lanes every year. Control these waters, and you control a lifeline for half the world's economies. The campaign was so extensive that in 2015, U.S. Admiral Harry Harris dubbed it China's Great Wall of Sand. The scale was staggering. Giant dredging ships like the Tianjin-Ho, one of the largest of its kind, clawed up 4,500 cubic meters of sand and rock per hour and piled it onto reefs to form artificial land masses. In just a few years, China created 7 new island bases in the Spratly chain and expanded 20 existing outposts in the Paracels, burying more than 4,600 acres of coral reef in the process. By the late 2010s, these strategic pearls included Fiery Cross Reef, Subi Reef, and Mischief Reef, each bristling with radars and surface-to-air missiles. Beijing seemed to have altered the balance of power in the South China Sea almost overnight. But here's what they didn't advertise. These artificial islands aren't all they're cracked up to be. By 2019, reports emerged that the concrete used to pave the islands couldn't withstand the harsh marine environment. The constant battering of waves, the corrosive salt water, the humid tropical climate. It was turning Chinese concrete into something like a sponge. The structures were deteriorating far faster than expected. Why? Because China extended its infamous domestic construction shortcuts to these remote islands. Speed and cost took priority over longevity. Normally, to stabilize a reclaimed island, builders would drive sturdy pilings down to bedrock and construct steel-reinforced seawalls. On some of these reefs, those steps weren't rigorously followed, possibly to save time and money or because corrupt contractors pocketed the difference. The result? Part of the islands have started to subside back into the sea. Coastal erosion gnaws at the edges. Without proper reinforcement, loose sand and gravel wash away, especially when faced with strong storms. And here's the cruel irony. By building the islands, China actually destroyed the natural coral reefs and sandbars that might have dissipated wave energy. They blasted away their own natural wave breaks. Add climate change to the equation, sea levels have risen nearly 4 inches since 1992, with projections suggesting another 1 to 3 feet by century's end. These islands were built barely at sea level. Any significant rise could leave them chronically waterlogged or submerged by waves. And despite boasting runways long enough for heavy bombers, there have been few reports of China's Air Force actually using them regularly. Analysts noted that by 2020, Chinese fighter jets had rarely landed on these airstrips. Some speculate the runways might not be trustworthy. The ground could be settling or the pavement too weak to support continuous operations. Nature itself is undermining China's strategic outposts. Erosion, sinking, and decay mean these expensive bases might crumble without a shot being fired. What was meant as a bold statement that China is here to stay in the South China Sea may become an enduring embarrassment. If China's most strategic strongholds are falling apart, what does that say about everything else? Let's bring it home, because while the world was watching those military islands, something far more heartbreaking was happening on Chinese soil. May 12, 2008, a magnitude 7.9 earthquake struck Sichuan province. The quake was devastating, but what outraged the public was how disproportionately schools collapsed compared to other buildings. Over 7,000 classrooms and school buildings pancaked into rubble. Even as many older or neighboring buildings stood. In town after town, children were crushed to death in structures that were supposed to be safe havens. Parents digging through rubble pulled out school bags and the bodies of their only children. Due to China's one-child policy at the time, many families lost their sole child forever. Officially, about 5,300 students died. Some estimates put it as high as 10,000. Why did so many schools fall? Investigations pointed to corruption and corner cutting. Those schoolhouses were built cheaply with substandard materials. Insufficient rebar, thin concrete, little earthquake reinforcement, because local officials siphoned off funds earmarked for education infrastructure. These flimsy buildings were derisively labeled TOFU-DRAG schoolhouses. The public was furious. Grieving parents staged protests demanding accountability. But the government's response? Suppressed the dissent. Police broke up demonstrations. Activists who tried to document the collapses were detained for inciting subversion. Media coverage was censored. Officials cordoned off the schools, and reportage simply stopped. They were told it was the price of progress. They buried their children under it. And here's the thing, the disasters never stopped. In 2009, a nearly finished 13-story apartment building in Shanghai's Lotus Riverside complex simply fell over onto its side. The entire building, intact but horizontal, toppled like a domino because workers excavated soil irresponsibly on one side while a river embankment on the other exerted pressure. The foundation pilings were too short and simply popped out of the ground. Pictures of the pristine-looking building lying on the ground shocked the nation. In 2012, the Yangmintan Bridge in Harbin, which had opened only 9 months prior, partially collapsed, sending vehicles plummeting and killing 3 people. Reports later found the bridge was completed in less than half the planned time. Quality checks were either rushed or bypassed entirely. In July 2023, the roof of a school gymnasium in Zhijiar collapsed during a rainstorm. Construction workers had stockpiled bags of perlite, a lightweight material that absorbs water and expands up to 4 times its volume, on the roof. When the rain came, the perlite swelled and grew extremely heavy, caving in the roof on a girls' volleyball team practicing below. 11 people, mostly teenage students, were killed beneath the rubble of a building that practically disintegrated on top of them. Just months later, in November 2023, another gymnasium roof collapsed in the same province after a heavy blizzard. 3 more dead. Chinese netizens pointed out that safety inspections were supposedly ordered after the July disaster, yet only 3 months later, another roof fell. In May 2024, a section of the Meizhou-Debu Expressway in Guangdong collapsed into a ravine after torrential rains. The disaster struck at night on the eve of a national holiday. An 18-meter chunk of the road fell dozens of feet, taking 23 vehicles with it into the mud. At least 52 people were killed and 30 injured. Even more troubling, locals said a similar slope collapse happened on the same highway less than a year prior. Warnings weren't heeded. And in November 2025, just weeks ago, the Hongqi Bridge in Sichuan, part of a new highway to Tibet, collapsed into a river. The bridge had opened earlier in the year. It lasted less than 12 months. But this wasn't just isolated corruption. It became China's national business model. Now, we need to talk about the engine driving all of this: China's real estate empire. For years, the mantra was simple: real estate is king. Home ownership in China is extremely high. Around 90% of urban households own their own home, many owning more than one. Investing in property was considered as safe as gold. Housing prices skyrocketed. Developers had every incentive to build more and more. Banks poured loans into developers. Local governments sold land at high prices to fund themselves. And ordinary families sank their life savings into new apartments, hoping to ride the wave of rising values. Here's the catch: Chinese families have 70% of their wealth tied up in real estate, compared to just 35% in the United States. When property values fall, they don't just lose a little money, they lose everything. At the center of this storm is China Evergrande Group, a property developer that grew into one of the largest companies in the world and one of the most indebted. At its peak, Evergrande had over 1,300 projects across more than 280 cities. Its chairman became one of the richest men in Asia. The company didn't just build apartments, it built sprawling mega projects with hundreds of towers, shopping malls, theme parks, even an artificial island resort. It ventured far beyond housing, buying a professional soccer team, investing in electric vehicles, dabbling in insurance, owning mineral water brands, even pig farming. But much of this was built on debt. By 2020, Evergrande owed a staggering $300 billion to banks, investors, construction contractors, and homebuyers in the form of undelivered apartments. And then the house of cards collapsed. In late 2021, Evergrande defaulted on offshore bond payments. By 2022, it was clear the company couldn't pay most of its obligations. Construction on many sites ground to a halt because contractors hadn't been paid, leaving buildings half-finished and millions of buyers in limbo. Would those apartments ever be completed? Would families ever see their money again? Desperate homeowners and unpaid suppliers rallied outside Evergrande's offices. One widely circulated video showed a woman in tears at the company's Shenzhen headquarters crying, If you won't return my money, I'll jump off the building. In January 2024, a Hong Kong court ordered Evergrande to liquidate. The company's founder, Wei Ka-yan, was detained on suspicion of crimes. His personal assets are now being hunted by liquidators, trying to recover $6 billion in salaries and dividends paid to executives. And in August 2025, Evergrande was officially delisted from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Shares that once traded at 31 HK became worthless, a 99% collapse. The world's most indebted real estate developer finally vanished from the ticker. But Evergrande wasn't alone. Country Garden, another massive developer, defaulted on $187 billion worth of debt. Dozens of other developers, Sunac, Kaisa, Shimyao, also struggled under heavy debts, and many engaged in the same quality skimping practices that plagued the entire industry. And then there's something we haven't mentioned yet, something that makes all of this even more terrifying: the sea sand scandal. In 2013, officials in Shenzhen discovered at least 15 large buildings under construction using concrete made with untreated sea sand, including what was slated to be one of the tallest skyscrapers in the world, the 660-meter Ping An Finance Center. Work on that tower was halted until the materials could be rectified. Sea sand is cheaper and readily available, but it contains salt and chloride that corrode steel rebar and weaken concrete significantly. Structures built with it can start to crack and crumble within just a few years. Chinese media reported that concrete from some suppliers was so weak you could break it apart with your hands. Rebar so thin it could be bent or snapped without tools. How many buildings across China quietly incorporated the same substandard concrete? Nobody knows. It's a ticking time bomb, potentially thousands of buildings rotting from within. They bought homes that don't exist, in towers that won't stand, from companies that no longer answer the phone. Real estate and related industries account for an estimated 25 to 30% of China's GDP. Housing prices have fallen more than 35% since 2021. There are over 20 million pre-sold apartments that might never get finished. Ghost cities dot the landscape, entire districts of high-rise apartment blocks, completely built, but largely empty. One famous example is the Tiedoncheng near Hangzhou, designed as a replica of Paris, complete with an Eiffel Tower imitation. It was built to house 10,000 residents. For years after completion, it was largely a ghost town, a replica city devoid of people. Evergrande's most grandiose failure? Ocean Flower Island, a $13 billion man-made archipelago off Hainan province, meant to be a tourist paradise. In January 2022, authorities ordered 39 illegally built towers demolished. And just when China needed resilience the most, nature delivered the final blow. What makes China's infrastructure predicament even more alarming is that the worst may be yet to come. As climate change accelerates, China is seeing more extreme weather, intense downpours, unprecedented floods, heat waves, and powerful storms. These events are putting additional stress on structures that are already of questionable quality. Nature is conducting a brutal stress test of China's built environment, and many systems are failing. The GGR gymnasium collapse happened because workers left water-absorbing perlite on the roof during monsoon season. Basic negligence. But it only became deadly because the roof wasn't built to handle even modest additional load. Even more infuriating, local authorities corralled grieving parents and tried to keep media away. One father said police were sent to monitor families, but did not send anyone to update us about our children. The instinct was to control information, not provide transparency. The Guangdong Highway collapse? A provincial report cited insufficient awareness of precipitation hazards. Officials from multiple transport agencies were disciplined or demoted, but the lessons keep going unlearned. In 2020, after historically high flooding in the Yangtze River Basin, concerns were raised about the Three Gorges Dam, the world's largest hydroelectric dam. Authorities had to release huge volumes of water to prevent overtopping, causing flooding downstream. Whether or not Three Gorges itself was at risk, many smaller dams did fail that year. Thousands of miles of dikes were damaged. Again, fingers were pointed at TOFU-DRAG construction. The government disclosed that dozens of officials were being prosecuted for corruption related to those projects. If a major dam were to collapse due to corruption-laden construction, the consequences would be apocalyptic, potentially hundreds of thousands of lives at risk. This isn't hypothetical. It's exactly what Premier Zhu Rongji feared back in 1998 when he first raged about TOFU-DRAG works after the Yangtze flooding. Every time infrastructure fails, the government's response has been a mix of quick fixes and suppressing information. State media labeled the highway collapse a natural disaster rather than an accident, implying no one was at fault. But the Chinese public today is far more connected than ever before. When something collapses, witnesses post videos online. Censors work aggressively to take them down, but the footage spreads anyway. Each collapse adds to a narrative that China's rapid rise has a brittle underside. Bridges buckle, highways vanish, skyscrapers sway. You can't censor gravity, you can't jail erosion. Because what's crumbling now isn't just concrete, it's the narrative. The evidence is plain to see. China is literally cracking under the weight of its own ambitions. The phenomenon of TOFU-DRAG engineering represents more than just bad building practices. It's a symptom of deeper systemic issues: corruption, lack of accountability, and a growth-at-all-costs mentality that produced a landscape littered with structurally suspect bridges, buildings, roads, and artificial islands. For years, these problems were papered over by China's astounding economic rise and the sheer momentum of development. But now, as growth slows and nature turns up the pressure, the flaws are coming to light in deadly ways. This is a pivotal moment. Infrastructure is the backbone of any nation, and in China, it underpins the legitimacy of the ruling party. The Communist Party has long derived public support from its ability to deliver modernization. Glossy propaganda showcases high-speed trains, shiny airports, and grand bridges as proof of China's progress. But when a modern highway collapses into a valley, or children die under collapsed school roofs, or thousands of citizens find their expensive new homes are actually unsafe, the narrative of benevolent, competent governance takes a hit. How many such hits can it take? Consider a significant share of Chinese household wealth is tied up in property that's now losing value. Local governments are deeply in debt. If more buildings start showing structural problems, there could be a crisis of confidence. People might refuse to buy homes. Protests could spread. The government's usual playbook is repression. But you can't arrest a cracked bridge. You can't censor a collapsed dam into standing back up. At some point, engineering reality forces a reckoning. On the international stage, China's rivals are surely taking note. The sinking of an artificial island means China's military foothold in the South China Sea may not be as secure as it appears. Adversaries could exploit these vulnerabilities, or simply wait out the elements. And domestically, if resources must be diverted to constantly patch up failing infrastructure, that's less money for technology development or military expansion. Every dollar spent shoring up a crumbling runway is a dollar not spent on the next generation of weapons or semiconductors. The term falling apart might sound exaggerated. China isn't literally collapsing overnight, but we see a pattern of slow-motion structural decay that, if not addressed, could lead to a larger societal breakdown. It calls to mind historical empires that overextended. Sometimes it wasn't foreign invasion that brought them down, but internal rot. Mismanagement, corruption, failure to maintain what they had built. The era of mindless building is over. China no longer benefits from just throwing up infrastructure for the sake of growth. Now it must contend with the consequences. Will they undertake the costly task of reinforcing the most vulnerable structures? Will they hold corrupt builders and officials truly accountable? Or will they continue to hide the cracks and pray nothing major goes wrong on their watch? The answers will determine whether China's great rise will be remembered as a sustainable ascent, or an edifice built on sand that couldn't stand the test of time. Rome didn't fall in a day, neither will China. But make no mistake, it is falling. So what do you think? Is this the beginning of China's long decline? Or can they turn it around? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to understand more about the forces reshaping global power, hit subscribe and join us at Fall of Nations. Because empires don't just fall from the outside, sometimes they crumble from within.